met in just like a couple weeks.
Good afternoon and welcome to this special event. I'd like to acknowledge the entirety of the EKR team. We'll be introducing more specifics, but everybody you see here is very integral in pulling this all together. So thank you for your attendance. And we are very glad to have you at this important event because we're celebrating two special moments for the EKR group of Mexico Centro. First, we're excited to share with you this third anniversary of the foundation, which fills us with pride and motivation, because the entire EKR has worked hard to continue to evolve the culture of death in Mexico, Latin America, and the rest of the world. And it's a true honor for us to continue and witness this loving legacy of our beloved pioneer, Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. Seat is reserved. And next, we'd like to thank CASA, this establishment, for opening its doors to us, our sponsors and organizers, and the entire community that made this possible. And finally, we would like to invite you to participate in the auction. The number that you received upon your registration can be used to make the silent auction on the forms. A little detail there. This auction aims to raise funds for the Green Burial Project, where the effort is not only set on making history in San Miguel de Allende, but also to ensure a valuable legacy for our future generations. At the end, we'll enjoy cocktails and live music, presented by yours truly. And without further ado, I'll give the word to our three primary hosts as introductions. And the rest of our speakers tonight will be introduced by the key speakers. So we have welcome our president of the Fundación. She's a transpersonal psychologist, ordained interfaith minister. She married my wife and I 3 months ago. We're very honored. Thank you. She is also a life, death, and transition doula, grief counselor, dream worker, teacher, writer, facilitator, Tai Chi and Qigong instructor, photographer, musician, artist, jeweler, baker. She makes wonderful bread. And myth maker. Next we have Wendy, a theologian. A sociologist, thanatologist, and music therapist. How nice. The director of the Foundation of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Guatemala and the Guatemalan Association of Thanatology and End-of-Life Care. Wendy is a visionary, compassionate, humanist, and enjoys creating educational and social programs. And lastly, of course, we have Tanner. The man of the hour, she is the son of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, who is he's also the founder and president of the EKR Foundation and serves on several boards of directors. Ken was the primary caregiver for Elisabeth in the last 9 years of her life until her death in 2004. Ken is a professional photographer, recently meeting his goal to photograph 101 countries. Thank you. And so now I'll hand it over to my wife, who will say exactly what I said in Spanish.
Buenas tardes a todos nuevamente. Bienvenidos a esta velada. Nos alegra mucho contar con su presencia en este evento tan importante para nosotros, porque estamos celebrando dos momentos muy importantes para la Fundación EKR México Centro. Démosles un gran aplauso que han estado trabajando tan duro para poder estar aquí en este día y obvio están viendo todo el arte que es impecable que está aquí, que a mí me fascina. Gracias. Primero, nos entusiasma compartir con ustedes este tercer aniversario de la Fundación que nos llena de orgullo y motivación. ha trabajado arduamente para seguir evolucionando la cultura de muerte en México, Latinoamérica y en todo el mundo. Es un verdadero honor para nosotros poder continuar y atestigar el hermoso legado de nuestra querida pionera, la doctora Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. Segundo, queremos agradecerle a casa por abrirnos sus puertas. Gracias a nuestros patrocinadores, organizadores y a toda la comunidad que ayudó a hacer esto posible. Finalmente, queremos invitarles a participar en la subasta que, al entrar a cada quien le proporcionaron un número que es para poder entrar o si gustan hacer una oferta para la subasta silenciosa que tenemos disponible. Sí, para la subasta, perfecto. Que tiene como objetivo la recaudación de fondos para el proyecto de Entierros Verdes, donde la apuesta está no solamente en hacer historia en San Miguel de Allende, sino que también asegurar un valioso legado para nuestras futuras generaciones. Al terminar, disfrutaremos de un cóctel y música en vivo que estará tocando mi esposo. Y alimentos también estarán disponibles. Sin más preámbulo, cederé la palabra a nuestros tres ponentes de esta noche, que es Vicki presidente de EKR México Centro. Es psicóloga transpersonal, ministra, ecuménica, ordenada, dula de muerte, consejera de duelo, trabajadora de sueños, docente, escritora, facilitadora, instructora de Tai Chi, Qigong, fotógrafa, música, artista, joyera, panadera, que ahora me toca probar, y creadora de mitos. A nuestra siguiente sería Wendy Pineda, directora y general de EKR Guatemala, es teóloga, socióloga, tanatóloga y musicoterapeuta. Es directora general de la Fundación Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, capítulo Guatemala, y de la Asociación Guatemalteca de Tanatología y Cuidados al Final de la Vida. Wendy, visionera compasiva, humanista, crea programas sociales educativos. Y por último, por supuesto, Ken Ross, EKR Global. Ken es el hijo de la doctora Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, es fundador y presidente de la Fundación EKR y sirve en varias juntas directivas. Ken fue el cuidador principal de su madre durante sus últimos 9 años de vida hasta que falleció en el 2004. Ken es fotógrafo profesional y ha logrado fotografiar su meta más de 101 países. Corriente. Un aplauso.
Bueno, sí, ¿suena? Sí. Okay. Bueno, gracias a todos por estar aquí. Thank you very much for being here. Quiero añadir a la introducción, I want to add to this introduction because our lovely team has done a great job. Todos en el equipo han hecho un gran trabajo y hemos cambiado todos los planes porque bajo la marcha nos damos cuenta de qué es lo que hay que hacer. So we work in this way that we realize as we are going through it what actually needs to happen. So the original plan is not what's happening today, and we are very glad for it, porque pasa lo que tiene que pasar, ¿no? So what needs to happen is what actually happens. Quiero presentar a nuestro vicepresidente de la Fundación EKR México Centro, que es Felix Chancellor. So I'm presenting our Vice President, Felix Chancellor, and I could say many things, pero vamos a empezar. Es igual de He's just as qualified as all the rest of us. Tenemos a nuestra invitada especial, Marielo, de Guatemala también, que nos apoyó con el taller que dimos ayer y estamos haciendo un gran trabajo en conjunto y luego les contamos. So this is Marielo Miranda, and she is part of the EKR team in Guatemala. She's a special guest, and she helped us with yesterday's workshop. And we're working on several projects we'll tell you about in a little while. Y Marisol Maldonado, nuestra secretaria de la Fundación México Centro, que también es y Luisa Ruiz, que es nuestra directora del Consejo Asesor y que nos apoya con la supervisión de los equipos de voluntarios de DULAS. And I realized I'd just been talking in Spanish for like the last 15 minutes. Pero, so Luisa is our director of the advisory council, and she supports the supervision of our volunteer team. And Jess Miramontes is our treasurer, and she is the inscriptions queen for our doula program. And by the way, the first Death to a School is happening here right now. Entonces, Jess, que es nuestra tesorera, pero que ella es quien se encarga de todo lo que tiene que ver con la administración de registro de estudiantes de la primera escuela de dulas de muerte en Latinoamérica, que está aquí en San Miguel. If you didn't know. Okay? And now we're going to take a moment to officially open the space, sacred space, that is this time that we share together. Vamos ahora a oficialmente abrir la ceremonia, el convivio, el trabajo que estamos haciendo con una ofrenda que nos va a dar el maestro Lalo.
Siempre agradeciendo, hay que dar gracias por todo lo que sucede, desde el hecho de que estamos vivos y aquí estamos, y dar gracias por esta labor tan importante que hacen aquí en esta asociación. Y pues siempre se le pide permiso al dador de la vida, a nuestra Madre Tierra, a los sagrados elementos, a las direcciones que nos den la inspiración necesaria para que esto salga de la mejor manera y que podamos continuar con estos trabajos con tanto éxito como los han tenido hasta ahora. Muchas gracias.
Les quiero decir una cosa más, que aquí somos familia, somos humanos más que todo. So before anything else, we are people, we are human, and we are family, right? We're community. Aquí las formalidades no entran. Formalities don't exist here. So we are all together, you know, we have these chairs over here and here, but we are all together. So we're not going to be very formal in that regard, okay? So
Hi everybody. Can you hear me? Am I going to have a translator or we're just going to...
¿cuánta gente no entiende nada de inglés? Está bien si no entiende inglés. ¿Alguien? Is it okay if he just speaks in English? ¿O quieren traducirlo?
Okay for me.
¿Seguro? ¿Parece? Okay, bueno, okay.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Yoka gave me very little instructions on what to say to you, so I'm just going to take a guess at what she wants to hear. To some degree, what you'd like to hear. So, Ken Ross. I had the wonderful fortune of having Elisabeth as my mother. And, it was an incredible childhood growing up with the this crazy Swiss hillbilly. When I was 9 years old, her first book came out, and after that, my mom was just constantly traveling. She was never in the house. She'd come home for a weekend, cook the entire time, answer some letters, and then Monday morning, she was out the door. And so the only way I got to see my mother was to travel with her. And by the time I was in college, I had already been to 20 countries with my mom. I had seen over 100 lectures. I met her international groups all over the world, in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, in Europe, a little bit in South America, not a huge amount. So, you know, I started out the first 9 years of my life as a normal child with a quasi-normal family. Both my parents were doctors, talking about death every day at the dinner table. So it was a little unusual. But then my mom was off traveling around the world, and I'm reading about my mother in the newspapers. And she's on the cover of strange magazines like Playboy and People. It's very embarrassing for a child because we're already embarrassed by our parents if they're just normal, but if they're in the public eye, then you're really embarrassed. So I kind of shied away from her work, and yet I was fascinated because when I traveled with her, no matter where we went, my mother seemed to have this deep connection with everyone around the world. And my mother would say, Kenneth, I'm speaking tonight at the Sydney Town Hall in Australia. 2,000 people. She'd say, please don't come, it'll make me nervous. Really, 2,000 people? I would make me nervous. But now I kind of get it. But back then, you know, I would, of course, not listen to my mother and sneak in the back and listen to her. But I was equally interested to listen to the people in the audience because they're like, oh, she's a cheeky bird, you know, she's very interesting. So it was interesting to listen to my mother's presentations, which she never had a plan, she never had a script. Every night she'd say she could smell the audience. I'm going to smell what they want to hear, right? So she just used her third eye, and she would go up there and just, you know, speak to 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people. This is before the internet. So, you know, it was just incredible to watch. And we went all over the world. And then after the presentations, she liked to do something with her son as a mother. So we'd go off, and frequently we would see the indigenous people of the country. Because she said, these are the real people who understand life, death, they're not contaminated by so-called education, Western society. And so we'd go to meet shaman, fortune tellers. I saw tables floating. I saw a Lebanese fortune teller who totally told the fortune, said somebody in our family was going to die 6 months later. And I assumed it was going to be my father. And 3 months later, without any plan of it, our grandmother moved in, and she died the month that this fortune teller mentioned. Even though it wasn't even a plan. I mean, she didn't know our family, but even beyond that, there was no plan for this woman to be in our household. So I saw many strange things growing up that defied logic. And it was an amazing upbringing. My mother went to meet Zulu witch doctors, American Indians. So it was quite an amazing experience. And also growing up, she was very controversial, which I didn't understand because she was always just trying to do the right thing, helping dying people. And yet they were constantly attacking her in the press. The doctors didn't like her. Doctors spit on her in the hallways. The administration wanted to fire her because they were making the hospital known as the death and dying hospital. They didn't like that. So, you know, I grew up kind of seeing my mother from these different angles, as a son, as a companion, traveling with her, reading about her in the press, hearing people talk about her in the audience who didn't know I was related to her. But it was really fascinating. Now I want to go back even further because every time I speak, I like to give one unknown fact about hospice or palliative care, grief, my mom's legacy. So the roots, I think, of all this work in hospice and end of life, as I see it, actually go back to World War II and go back to Poland, oddly enough. How many of you are familiar with Viktor Frankl? Logotherapy, you know, incredible gentleman. Victor was friends with my mother, which was wonderful. And of course, my mother's work was very much identified with Victor's work, finding meaning in suffering. So Victor, of course, had been at the concentration camps. And from that experience in 1946, he wrote his most famous book. My mother, the day the war ended in Switzerland as a little teenage girl. She volunteered for a peace group, and she went out rebuilding Europe. So imagine this little 5-foot-tall teenage Swiss girl hitchhiking through Europe to rebuild villages. She was just completely fearless. But in 1947, she spent a year in Poland, like Viktor Frankl. She went to the concentration camps. She met people who had been interned at the concentration camps, and she had some very interesting conversations with them that completely changed her views of life and death. Now, another character in this history of hospice palliative care that I think deserves mention is Dame Cicely Saunders. She's a woman who began the first modern hospice in 1967. Let me get some water here. Okay, so Dame Cicely Saunders fell in love with a Polish refugee in late 50s, and unfortunately he had a terminal diagnosis and he died in 1960. So from this event, Cicely spent years thinking about how this man had died in total pain, as she called it. And she said, this is unacceptable that in the 20th century, people are dying in total pain. We cannot allow this to happen. And so 7 years later, she began the famous St. Christopher's Hospice in England. So Cicely was influenced by a dying Polish refugee, Viktor Frankl, logotherapy from his experience in Poland, and my mother from her experiences living in Poland for a year in 1947, going to the concentration camps. Poland features in all these incredible pioneers' history with hospice. So it's very unusual that they all come from this one country that's not known for, igniting this incredible movement. Some other people who deserve mention, I just want to mention them because I've met them over the years. Balfour Mount is the man who created the word palliative care because in Canada, in French, hospice did not sound very good. So he tried to think of a new word for it. And after meeting with my mother, he realized he didn't know anything about death and dying. So he started investigating death and dying, and he created the phrase palliative care. So we have Elizabeth, 1969, Balfour, 1973. We have Victor doing his work. Then we have Florence Wall, who started the first hospice in the United States, 1973. Now there's over 5,000 hospices. So these team of 4 people went out and met with each other and tried to spread this beautiful work of hospice. I think we should all know their names and do a little research on their histories because they're incredible people whose visionary work we all kind of stand on their shoulders and continue what they were brave enough to start. So this takes one person to plant a seed. And so after traveling with my mother and meeting some of these visionaries, I went off and did my own thing. My mother taught me to go out and enjoy life because life was short. And so I dreamed of going off and photographing in 101 countries. So I did it. I just challenged my fears. I didn't know anything about photography. I had no training. And I went out and I lived my dream, and that was fantastic. Around 2005, I heard this story. My mother was living in Virginia, trying to start a hospice for AIDS babies who had been abandoned in hospitals. And so the locals didn't like that, and so they burned her house down after a number of death threats. So I brought my mother to Arizona, where I was living, and for 9 years I took care of her. Very challenging time. I had a heart attack, actually, in Hermosillo, Mexico. So I have a deep history with life and death here in Mexico in many ways, many levels. But after taking care of her, she passed after 9 years, and I decided I needed to start a foundation to continue her work. We still got hundreds of letters every week from around the world. A woman showed up from Bombay a few days after my mom died and said she'd flown to Arizona just to meet with my mother. I said, I'm so sorry, we just missed her, just by a few days. And so I ended up taking this woman to the room where my mom died. I let her touch her clothing. I told her stories, and she got the sense of my mother's spirit in the room. And so she said, you know what, I think this is enough. I'm just going to use this experience and go back and honor your mother. I will do this hospice, even though I didn't get a chance to talk to her. And so from that experience, I thought, wow, I really have to do something with this legacy. And so I began the foundation. And that was 17, 18 years ago now. I was a bohemian photographer. I did not know much about business. So it was a long learning curve. I I'm still learning. But the last 2-3 years, it's really taken off. And we've begun these international chapters, meeting Wilka and Wendy, and we have other groups in Argentina, Chile, in Peru, Japan, France, Belgium, India. And they're all wonderful, wonderful chapters. I kind of see my mother's legacy as a tree, and the foundations are like the branches of this legacy. She's gone, but she planted the seed. Her tree and the branches live on. As Wilka is training you, and as Wendy is training you, we're all becoming the seeds that drop from this tree to plant new trees all around the world. And from this gift of traveling with my mother, I saw the importance of my mother's legacy in different cultures around the world. And I saw it just transcended time, space, socioeconomic levels, religions. Her books have now been translated into 44 languages. We did 4 new languages just last year after half a century. It's still growing. We did Arabic, Albanian, Farsi, and Mongolian. We're working on Ukrainian editions now and some new languages in different Indian languages, such as Hindi. And we're starting a number of programs in the foundation. We're working with Stanford University. They have my mom's her archives, so they're going to build a digital library that'll be accessible to you in English and Spanish. And we are working on documentaries, a feature movie. We're working on a new Friends of EKR program. That'll be, we have the chapters, but then other people who don't want to build an entire chapter, but would like to be involved, we're promoting this new idea of the Friends of EKR, so you can be a part of the foundation without having the tough work of, building a whole business structure. So we've already had interest from Greece, Canada, Ukraine, Singapore, and other countries. So that'll be something we're going to be announcing officially in the next few months. We've got new groups starting in Colombia. I'm going to Singapore in a few months to start our new chapter there. So I encourage you to come to our social media, Wilka's, Wendy's, and find out more about this beautiful gift that's happening. Now, one thing that I saw traveling around the world is we didn't go much to Latin America. And I think my mother thought that Latin America at that time, 40 years ago, was not ready for the message. And so she said, don't worry, I planted the seeds and one day it will come to Latin America. So as my mother's emissary here, I'm hoping to continue this work, and I've been focusing on Latin America because I saw it was neglected in the past, not because she didn't want to, but because she only had so much time. I can imagine my mother had a working farm. She was seeing patients. She wrote 24 books. She began this work when she was 40 and retired in the 60s. So she did a huge amount of work. So if you think you don't have enough time, nonsense. You have enough time. So she was answering hundreds of thousands of letters. She was giving workshops on her farm. She was canning preserves. This woman was just nonstop. It was just incredible. So anyway, today we're here to promote EKR in Latin America. And Wendy's working in Central America, doing a lot of different work in different countries, in Belize. We just went to El Salvador together about 6 weeks ago. We're going to be working with the country's only hospice there. And Wilka's had some contact with Costa Rica today, so we're investigating that. But a lot of things happening. Each chapter is a little bit different, so, we all have different flavors. But they all taste good to me, so. So anyway, I want to thank Wilka and Wendy and all our great Latin American team. And I want to thank you for being a part of this wonderful group and helping to preserve Elizabeth's legacy and to create your own legacy and to live your life fully without fear, as my mother would say, to live your life love-based. And just remember, our time here is finite, and to go out and take chances. And if we don't make mistakes, we're not trying to hurt enough, right? So we're going to take some chances. Because I said I'd never publicly speak. Never. So I've been doing it 12 years now. So far, so good. So anyway, again, I welcome you. I'll pass the microphone on to our next victim. So thank you very much.
Hola, hola. 1, 2, 3. ¿Ya? ¿Ya funciona? Ok. Bueno, muchas gracias, Ken.
De nada.
Queremos que esto sea un diálogo, que no sean solo comentarios o preguntas, que no tengan pena y que nos digan, oye, espérame. So we want to, as I said, we don't want to be formal, we want this to be a dialogue and not just us here telling you something. And therefore, as you have a question or a comment that you want to share, you can just wave at us and we would love the dialogue so that it's not just, exposition. ¿Va? Any comments or questions at this time? Preguntas.
Gracias, hola, bien, gusto verte otra vez. Nice to see you. Yo quisiera saber, bueno, me muero, la verdad, no quiero aguantar porque me muero de ganas de saber del proyecto de Entierros Verdes, pero también de la escuela de Dulas de San Miguel. No sé mucho qué estás pasando en Guatemala, obviamente me gustaría conocer también qué estás haciendo aquí, pero creo que la parte de los entierros verdes aquí en San Miguel pues nos entusiasma mucho a mí y sé que a mucha gente también, y pues eso quiero.
Sí, claro.
Yeah. So she's just wanting to get to the cake part of this presentation. Basically, she wants to know about green burials and what's going on with this school. Huh? We're talking about that for sure. Not quite yet, pero estamos llegando a eso. Te voy a pasar el micrófono si quieres. Hablas en. ¿Sí?
Sí. Muchas gracias. Como dijeron, mi nombre es Wendy Pineda, soy de Guatemala y quisiera decir que parece que esto nace ahora.
She would love to say that it would seem that things are just being born now.
Pero realmente esto surgió en la eternidad y solo, como dijo Ken, somos portadoras de una semilla que hoy está floreciendo y que esperamos que dé más semillas para que más personas en el futuro puedan seguir con este legado.
But in fact, this started in eternity, and there were many seeds that have been planted over time that are now como germinating or beginning to flourish or bloom, and sprouting, and hoping that more seeds then get spread, and it's an ongoing thing.
Por 2 años he perseguido a Wilka con el tema de las dulas y siempre había algo, sí ahora, pero no era ahora, no era el momento.
So she says that for 2 years she's been pursuing me. Chasing me, that's not her. Because she wants to have something happen in Guatemala with the dulas, and we're expecting for the right time, and it now is the time. Like before we wanted to, and it was part of that germinating process, no? Or sprouting.
Sí, pareciera que antes era el tiempo, pero realmente no estábamos preparados para hacerlo. No estábamos preparadas para comprender que somos hermanas realmente unidas desde la eternidad y teníamos que vivir nuestro momento en Guatemala para comprender eso.
That was really beautiful.
Oh.
So she had me as we're sisters. That the time is now, and it is evident to us now. Because I recently was in Guatemala and we met for the first time, so I'm not really translating, I'm paraphrasing. So we met in person for the first time, even though we've known each other online for 2 years. And it was only then that we could discover that we were sisters from eternity that were meeting again to move this work forward.
Cuando yo conocí a Wilka por Zoom, yo siempre decía que era una persona muy seria, muy seria. Y cuando la conocí en Guatemala, lo primero que hice fue llamar a Ken y decirle, Ken, ella es graciosa, ella sí se ríe.
Apparently I have this very serious persona on Zoom, and so Wendy thought I was like a really serious person. And then when we met in person, person, the first thing she realized was, she's actually funny. I would say more like goofy. And she was very pleased, and the first thing she did when she, when I wasn't looking, was call Ken and say, oh my goodness, she's actually funny. And she laughs.
Sí, y me ha pasado lo mismo con todo el equipo, se los he dicho a cada uno porque tal vez hemos tratado de ser muy propios en el aula virtual, pero realmente somos seres humanos que principalmente tenemos que tener, pues, la palabra no es divertirnos, pero que debemos disfrutar lo que hacemos.
So this is again paraphrasing, that she has been discovering with each of our team members that in fact we are human, and that, what connects us is that we really, truly, deeply enjoy what we do, and that it is a joy to us. And that's what makes us a family, because we have to love what we do or we wouldn't be doing it.
Lo que les decía, que al unirnos, al entender que somos hermanas y que hay algo mágico que se activó cuando nos dimos el primer abrazo, son proyectos para educar a nuestras comunidades, a ser más responsables y a humanizar realmente a la salud, a nuestras autoridades, a la población.
So after discovering this magic that is what unites all of us, and probably all of you too, right? It's not just us over here. All of us are here because of that. We immediately, things began to be planted and birthed, right? So we understand now the projects that need to take place and the work that we need to do to bring back humanity and to have a collective sense of responsibility. These beautiful things that she said.
Mi consejo para ustedes sería, démonos la oportunidad de ver más allá de lo que tuvimos, que fue el Zoom, pues ver más allá de esa primera imagen que a veces nos cierra, no nos permite ver la posibilidad de una persona noble y tal vez nuestra hermana cercana. O sea, perdemos la oportunidad de ver a alguien realmente como es, porque creemos que la primera imagen es todo, y en todo lo que hagan, por favor, diviértanse mucho.
She's sharing what she feels is the insight from that experience, that she's inviting all of us to not go by the first impression, that behind that is our sister, our brother, our sibling, and that above all, find joy in what you do, or be driven or guided by that joy.
Sí.
Bueno, ¿puedo decirlo?
Sí, claro.
Sí. Bueno, pues lo emocionante de todo esto es que Wendy ha estado trabajando muy arduamente por años, y que yo también por acá he estado trabajando y hemos estado como que yo no sabía lo que ella estaba haciendo, ya no sé lo que yo estaba haciendo y así. So the two of us have been individually and independently working really hard, having dreams and really doing something to make them happen from the ground up, ¿no? Algo que hemos estado haciendo individualmente, teniendo una visión, algo que nos llama, y empezando desde cero, y como a ver qué sale de ahí, ¿no? Vamos a ir alimentando esto. Entonces, Wendy ha estado desarrollando una escuela de tanatología con una base fundamental muy importante, y yo por acá he estado desarrollando un programa práctico, experimental y vivencial para el acompañamiento compasivo. So, she has been working really hard to develop a very theoretical, the foundation of thanatological services and processes, and I've been over here developing something that is experiential and of the practice of compassionate accompaniment. And we call it, on this end, we call it Life, Death and Transition Doulas, lo llamamos las doulas de vida, muerte y transición, y allá es un diplomado de tanatología. So in hers she has a certification for thanatology. And so now we are collaborating with Ken to develop the first really comprehensive and integral program that combines both of these things, and then we can offer the first global certification for the combination of these two things, right?
Una fusión.
Yeah, fusion. Ya lo dije en inglés, no.
Apoyo viviendo.
Tú lo dijiste en español, ok. Entonces, so this is what part of what's happening now, and the beauty of it is too is that I had this feeling that this was not about Mexico, although it is. Yo tenía esa sensación de que era acerca de México, pero que también no, que va más allá de México, que va más allá de Estados Unidos, va más allá de Canadá, de Centroamérica, que es una cosa colectiva, de comunidad, ¿no? And I felt that this was more than, it was this and more than. And now with Wendy and Ken, we're really realizing that yes, we are now touching a bigger community of Latin America in relation to whatever is, we are working with up north. Entonces, pues esta colectividad nos emociona muchísimo. This collectivity is very exciting to us. And so now we're starting to develop life, death and transition doula teams, volunteer teams here and in Costa Rica, and in Guatemala, and then we're moving into Salvador, and then Panamá, y así. Ajá, Nicaragua, perdón, sí. So it's spreading, no? So this spirit is spreading.
Gracias.
Gracias.
So I can just speak in English. Everybody's fine with that. So I'm going to take you on a little journey. I want you to imagine, or I would invite you to imagine, when you were a child and you were playing in sand, perhaps in a sandbox, perhaps in a family home, in the ocean, or the beach. Imagine all those grains of sand. Imagine how many grains of sand fit inside of your hand. How many in your bucket that you were using to make a capsule. Imagine all the grains of sand in that sandbox on the beach. Imagine all the grains of sand in the desert, in the Sahara. Imagine all the grains of sand on the surface of the earth. That's a lot of sand. But that's only 20% of all the sand. All the rest of the sand is underneath the oceans. Imagine all those grains of sand. That's quite a feat of the imagination. Now imagine that there are more stars in the known universe than there are grains of sand on Earth. The totality of all the grains of sand on Earth. There are more stars in the universe, and that's only what we know. And for every star, there is an average of 3 planets. In this universe of ours, there is constant movement, there is constant motion. And what propels this motion, from the life cycle of a virus, to the life cycle of a star, to the life cycle of a galaxy, and things which are unfathomable to us, is the cycle of life and death. Death is a determinant factor in all the known cosmos. It propels things, it moves things, it grows things, it entices things, and yet we refuse to accept that it exists. We will not talk about it, we will ignore it. In fact, a fundamental pillar of our culture is that we are above death. Our fights are towards immortality. This we believe to be a great virtue. Our very mythological foundation states that we are in dominion over the earth and nature, and that we are above these things, that we are separate, somehow the very darlings of all creation. So death is not part of our story, and we do not talk about this. And of course, what we must do when we die is commemorate ourselves in the best way possible, cement and marble and formaldehyde, so that we may leave such a pretty body in the earth. In all of these movements of the cosmos, and this is only what we know, there's so much we do not know. I mean, look at these incredible photographs that are being brought back to us right now by the Webb telescope. Things unimaginable. And yet, when my time comes, I believe the end is near. The end. And when this story is about me, then yeah, it's a fucking tragedy. Because it ends in death, and that's over. And all of these things don't have their place, and neither do I. Talking about death is not morbid. It is not negative. It is engaging with life. And if I can engage with my death and my end, then I begin the movement of finding my place within this unfathomably gorgeous, enormous dance, which in my little presentation right now, I only scratch the surface of. We each have our place, but part of our place has to do with our living, our growing, and our dying. And one of the things that we do or can do and have done traditionally in the past is to consecrate our body back to the earth and its cycles. We believe that we can do better, even in some proposed green burials. We're still complicating the matter. Large $2 million machines that turn us into compost, and you can take grandmama back home in a bag, right? So you can put her into the flower bed. And yes, it's nice. There's a romanticism to it, right? There's beautiful art things where you can be put into a pod that gets then put into the ground, and that's also very nice. But you know what? Our Big Mama has been doing this for billions of years. In fact, when you go outside and your bare feet touch the earth, you are touching millions of years of cadavers. Whether they're the cadavers of leaves, whether they're the cadavers of stones, whether they're the cadavers of snails or humans or whatever. The other part is shit, but yeah, both of those things. That's fine. Cadavers and shit, yes, that's what we're standing on top of. That is our foundation. And we believe that somehow we're better than that. But no, the idea is to return to what the earth knows best what to do. And as we deliver our bodies back to Big Mama, we return to that life cycle. And we realize, one, that this body which I am enjoying, and which I am suffering, and which I am living this particular story, is on loan to me. And the only thing I have to do, my only obligation, is to give it back so that new life may be grown from it. That is the foundation of the idea behind green burial. Authentic, simple green burial. But deeper than that, when I engage with green burial, when I commit myself back to the earth, I begin that journey of realizing that this story isn't about me. Now, I'm a part of it. It's not that I'm not entering some nihilistic notion that the universe moves on without me, right? And I'm just some forgotten, abandoned exile. No. When I can engage with that, I can find my place within this enormous story. I become a part of those gorgeous images that we see, the cartwheel galaxy that has just been photographed, right? The very edges of the cosmos 6 billion years ago. These things that are incredible, that we could not have imagined, that we've now photographed. That's what it means to engage with death, is to find my place within cosmos at life. And that, whether we're talking about literally green burial, whether we're talking about doulaship and accompaniment, whether we're talking about bringing in a new understanding of death, that is what we're here for. And that is what the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation is proposing, so that we can re-engage and reimagine ourselves within the context of the universe. And we can reimagine our own life not as some tiny tragedy, but as a chord in incredibly beautiful symphony. Thank you very much.
Ayer estuvimos en el taller de Sembrando el legado amoroso y sanando el duelo en comunidad. Y nos acompañó la artista Marty McGuinness, quien hizo una mortaja que está por ahí. Bueno, si quieres. Pero dijo una cosa que a mí me impresionó muchísimo. So yesterday we were at the Healing Grieving Community and Leaving a Loving Legacy as part of this program. We did a free workshop yesterday. And the artist Marty McGuinness, who was with us and who does the living or life shrouds, and there's one of them in auction today, she said something that really touched me and struck me, and I think it goes along with what Felix was just sharing with us. Dijo algo que a mí me impactó muchísimo y se los quiero compartir. Ella estaba hablando, échate para acá, y dice, es que básicamente, me están haciendo caso, es que básicamente ya estoy muerta, pero en este momento presente tengo la oportunidad de estar en este cuerpo, de percibir, sentir y compartir, de atestiguar y de hacer comunidad. Piénsenlo bien. So she said this thing, she in passing, and it just struck me so much. She said, basically, I'm already dead. But in this present moment, I'm already of the dead. But in this present moment, I have the opportunity of being in this body and perceive through it and feel with it and share with it and be in community with it. To me, that is the most profound thing. And I think it is aligned with what you say. We are more dead than we are alive. And the moment is now to take advantage of this privilege, ¿no? Estamos más muertos que vivos. Pero este es el momento de aprovechar que aquí estamos y hacerlo intencional and make it intentional, ¿no? Hacerlo amoroso, make it loving. Porque si nos encontramos a todas las personas, if we can meet every person as someone who is going to die at any moment, ¿no? Si me encuentro con cada persona como alguien que efectivamente va a morir en cualquier momento, ¿cómo cambiaría mi forma de relacionarme? How might my way of relating shift? So we are also here because of that. Aquí estamos también por eso. Quería ver si Marisol quería decir algunas palabras. ¿Cómo? Después de la presentación. Bueno. Lo vamos a hacer bien rapidito porque ya estamos todos listos para la fiesta. ¿Qué? Ok. Perdonen, pero sí lo vamos a hacer rapidito. We're going to do it as fast as we can so that we can get to the fun part of the auction and the party, right? Pero, Marielos, ¿quieres compartirnos algo? Ok. Y luego les cuento rápido del proyecto de Entierro Verde. And then I'll tell you about the Green Burial Project, and then we will have our drinks and have our informal talk.
Sí. Hablar de la muerte siempre es difícil. Creo que hay muchos tabús.
So speaking about death is very difficult. There are quite a number of taboos.
En Guatemala, a pesar que tenemos muchos rituales, pero muchos, es muy difícil encontrar esa parte de vivir dentro de la muerte. Y creo yo que ese es el mayor reto de la Fundación, al menos en Guatemala. Ese es nuestro mayor reto.
So despite all of the various rituals, we have many rituals in Guadalajara. We have many rituals and ceremonies in Guadalajara. One of the big challenges, and in particular for the EKR Foundation in Guatemala, is how do we live within this idea of death?
Y lo que hemos descubierto es que cuando llegamos por medio de la educación, porque la gente cree mucho en eso.
So what we discovered is that when we actually take this subject upon within the context of education, and people really believe in that.
Estamos enseñando a vivir como creo que Elisabeth nos enseñó.
So if we can bring this as an education, we're really demonstrating how to live as Elisabeth Kübler-Ross taught us, or as her legacy has bequeathed us.
Y creo que cada una de nosotras dentro de la fundación y todos los que forman parte, que no están acá, pero que es mucha gente, aprendimos a vivir gracias a la muerte.
So this central idea brought us all together in our foundation in Guatemala, which is us and many more that are not here present. And we have really learned how to live thanks to death.
Y así que esa es la invitación, aprendamos a vivir, porque al final la muerte nos puede llegar cualquier día.
And so that's the invitation. We got to learn how to live because death will be right behind that column.